Welcome to the Lifestyle First podcast, discussing lifestyle medicine and making self-care as easy as 1, 2, 3. 1 question, 2 research reviews, and 3 actionable health tips, all centered around the Lifestyle First method, your blueprint for the 10 key routes of optimal health and happiness. And now your host, lifestyle medicine physician and coach, Dr. Alka Patel.
Hi, hey, and hello, and welcome to Series 11, Episode 8 of the Lifestyle First podcast. The theme for today's conversation is L for learning habits. Now, habits. There is a habit that I must develop. Now, I say must because there's this urgency attached to this for me. And there's a reason for this urgency is because it all leads to one date. One date, April the 23rd, 2023. Any guesses? Have you got it yet? Oh yes, I am running the London Marathon, 23rd of April, 2023. So let me tell you about this. There I was watching the 2022 marathon on TV, and I just got caught up in all the emotion of it all, those scenes of the cheering crowds, the commitment of all those runners, the interviews of the real life stories, the dedication to the charities. So then when that message came up on the TV saying, ballot now open, without any conscious thought at all, you can guess what I did. I pressed enter. And then when that "you're in" email arrived, my first thought was, oh crap. And then it was very, very quickly followed by my second thought, which was, hell yes, I am doing this. Which means I now need to get into training mode. I need to develop a habit of running, a habit which is going to lead me right to the end to complete this magnanimous 26.2 mile, 42.2 kilometer run. So the question is, am I a runner? Well, I have been. I've never run a marathon before. This will be my very first marathon, but I have done several 5K and 10K runs before. But right now, I'm not a runner, which means I need to take on the identity of a runner, and I need to take on the habits of a runner so that I am prepared and that I am ready, because I know it's the habits that I create now that will take me to my destination, that finish line later. So if you have listened to previous episodes on this podcast, you'll be familiar with the science behind habits that I talk about and the techniques that work to embed actions without really having to rely on willpower. But what I know is that at the beginning, at the very, very beginning of creating a habit, you do need willpower and you need motivation to get you going. And so that one question that we're answering today is, how can a habit app help boost motivation to exercise? We're going to talk broader than my goal of finishing the marathon. We're going to talk about habits related to everyday movement and exercise. And to help answer this one question, how can a habit app help to boost motivation to exercise? I am very, very delighted to welcome my guest today. My guest is Andrew Lecocq. Now, Andrew is a serial entrepreneur and he's founder of Slope Health. Slope Health is an app that focuses on creating habits related to exercise and physical activity. And what Andrew is focused on is changing how we think about exercise, so that physical activity becomes a habit, it becomes a core component of preventive medicine. So Andrew, a very, very warm welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm incredibly excited to speak with you.
Oh, for sure. It's going to be a great conversation. So let's kick off with some definitions, if I may, because there's a few words that I find we use interchangeably. And those words that come to mind are exercise and physical activity and movement. So we use them interchangeably, but we also use them quite distinctly. So I'd be really keen to know what your definition of exercise is.
Yeah, it's a great place to start, and I think in some ways we could simplify it and say they're all the same thing, really, or at least they should be to a large degree, right? So the we purposely talk about activity, physical activity. You could supplement or change that for movement, and I think those are quite interchangeably. I think most people, if you were just to ask them on the street, would say, yeah, those sound more or less like the same thing. They're kind of in the same category. Um, Exercise is an interesting one because exercise has been kind of evolved and become a thing, in the recent term, where it signifies certain things, often intensity, certain ideas around things like going to the gym or sweating, or even wearing certain clothes, right? Like that's even a part of it. So I think it has evolved, but really what we should do is probably think of them as being the same, because at the end of the day, they really are. And I think, unfortunately, there are too many people who maybe get a little bit intimidated about exercise or don't like the word exercise. And that's why we're quite purposeful about talking about movement or activity, because we want it to be, all encompassing and as inclusive as possible, so as many people can take advantage of it as possible.
Yeah, I think you raised some really good points there, because when you use the word exercise, it tends to compartmentalize itself, doesn't it? It's I've got to go and do exercise. It's something you've got to go and seek out, as you say, go to the gym. But there is this sense of it's more focused, it's predefined, there's a specified time to it, or number of reps, or length, or duration, or endurance. So there's something around exercise which feels quite compartmentalized. Whereas I think what you're trying to say is that, well, movement is exercise because you are exercising your muscles, and it may not be in a more focused way that we've become used to in that sort of compartmentalized, rigid kind of thinking around exercise, but it all points to the same thing. It points to that same benefit in terms of health primarily. Which then brings me to the point of, well, when you talk then about exercise or movement or physical activity, how much? Because that's the next question I always get asked is, how much should I be exercising? So what's your answer to that? Because I know what I've said over the years, and I know now how I'm going to switch saying it. But tell me, how much?
Yeah, well, so I mean, I think the great thing here is we have the WHO's guidance and recommendations. So what they recommend is a minimum of 150 minutes of moderate exercise weekly. So if you break that down, it ends up to be about 22 minutes a day of moderate exercise. And I think moderate is the key thing, right? We started by talking about all these terms we could use, and exercise in particular. It does seem quite binary, and people think of it as intense. And actually, what we know from the medical research and everything that the WHO has based its recommendations on is that actually it's really about moderate activity. And so moderate activity is defined as 150% of your resting heart rate. For most people, if they walk, particularly if you do a brisk walk, you're surpassing the moderate threshold. And I think that's something that a lot of times gets lost in the conversation, is there are a lot of activities that we do every day that actually do qualify as moderate, or are very close to being moderate exercises. And so it's really just about focusing on at least 150 minutes. Of course, if you can do more, that's phenomenal. But it's really about getting in that 20 to 22 minutes a day of some type of activity, ideally surpassing that moderate threshold.
Yeah, yeah. Again, really interesting. There's two things coming to mind. Firstly, I spent a bit of time in Costa Rica this summer, where you'll know it's one of those blue zones where the world's longest living centenarians are living. And I spent some time with a family there. And when it came to just the observations around exercise and looking at what are people doing that are living the longest, it's that they're moving. That's what they're doing in their day to day. And I was on a particular farm, and of course there was milking the cows, and that's pretty strenuous exercise. I had to go, and it's harder than you can imagine. But it's also things such as walking up hills or plucking the fruits from the tree. And I know people listening are not predominantly living on farms, but even in our urban lifestyles, reaching down and picking things from the floor, carrying the heavy shopping, it's all part and parcel of that exercise. Because certainly in Costa Rica, nobody was going to the gym. Nobody was doing that. And yet we know they live the longest in terms of activating your longevity genes. It is that physical activity and that movement. So I think it's really great that you've highlighted the sort of difference, but also the number, that 150 minutes. I do want to pick up on that, because you're right. This is, public health guidance and World Health Organization guidance. But I know I spent many years telling my patients, yeah, just go exercise for 150 minutes a week. And I expected them to walk out of my consulting room and just do it. And of course, they didn't. Nobody does. So what sits behind that? Let's get even deeper into this 22 minutes. I mean, you make it sound so easy, right? Hey, it's only 22 minutes a day. How do we get to that? What do we need to sit behind that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the first step here is actually making it feel like it's doable for people, right? I think that's kind of the first mission we have, is to reinforce this message that 22 minutes is probably doable, and at some level, even if it's not on a particular day, doing something is doable every day, right? And I think that's the other piece to this, and I think that's a big focus for us is what can we get you to do every day? Because we hear a lot about things around like, oh, the best, right? What's the best way to do X, Y, Z, whatever you fill in the blanks with. And there are a couple of responses that I love that are basically, the best X is whatever you'll do, right? Whatever you'll actually get out and do. And I think that that's a part of it, right? When we talk about how we get to the 150 minutes, how we think about it, it's really about just what works for you, and really thinking about it in a personal sense, and almost kind of blocking out any other externalities, and just saying like, this is what works for me, and you know what, that's okay, and that's what I'm going to do. So I think that's an important place to start, just from the mentality perspective, is what works for you, and then you can build from there.
Yeah. And there's something you mentioned there around the everyday, the regularity, the persistence, the consistency. And then that needs to be something that's achievable. So what can you do that's persistent and that you can do with some regularity? Because that's the foundation of habit, of course, isn't it? It's the persistence and the regularity is what creates the habit, rather than the goal that you can never fully achieve. So I think that's a really important point to crystallize, isn't it? Is this sense of regularity, which is where your app comes into it, doesn't it? So tell us a little bit more about how the Slope Health app will help with that sense of being able to do something more regularly.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, right, we focus on forming the habits, because we know that that's what's going to really drive sustainable change for people in their lifestyle. So the way we think about this is, first, let's understand what our goals are. So we talked a little bit about, the ideal is 150 minutes or 22 minutes a day, but everybody's where they are right now. So let's start there, right? Let's start with where you are, and we'll build from there, right? Or we'll focus on getting the best version of you today that we could do, and then from there we start to build into focusing on motivation. So the colloquial version of this is your why, right? So why do you want to do something? And it's really important here to focus on, what ultimately matters. What's that one or maybe two things that are most important to you in your life? And then you build into, okay, so what are the benefits, right? What is it that I'm going to kind of experience from having done the activity, right? So let's understand and make that tangible and concrete for people. And then the last piece is, how do you do that, right? And that's where the habits become so important. And what's really important here is everything kind of ties together, right? So if you understand what your goal is, you're going to be more focused on it, right? And then you understand why you're doing it, then it's going to, especially in those tough days, it's going to reinforce for you, why you're actually getting up to do this, right? And then you can keep building from there. So you start to understand, oh, actually, the what is I have more energy, or I have less stress, right? And then you're getting to the point where all of this kind of positive wave, right, is taking you along, and all of a sudden you're starting to think, you know what? I've added the habit of walking to the tube. All of a sudden, you start to then look for some of those other opportunities to build those habits, which are so important. And then the last piece here is we focus on helping keep you accountable, right? So first off, we do that with just the app itself. So we're going to track every day how active you are, which is very telling, right? You see it right there in front of you. But we also provide support with our success coach, so that you can actually be, we can help you through this journey, right? Because the reality is most of us don't have all the answers. But the nice thing about being able to see this over the duration and over hundreds and thousands of users is we start to see patterns, and we can help take those patterns and show users, this is how you can think about this a little bit differently, or here's another idea that you might want to consider, so that we can create a very different experience, right? That's hopefully more positive, and more purpose driven, and the way that they think about living their everyday life.
Yeah. That's so good to hear, because it sounds as though you've got this really sort of packaged up with all those core elements. And I love what you've been talking about, because if any of those are missing, it takes you away from that achievement. So you've got to know the goal, haven't you? Where is it? What's that destination? And that biggest thing I found, again, in my practice as well, is the why, the motivation, the driver. Because until you can identify that, it's so easy for the habits to slip as well. And I'd mentioned earlier that I absolutely have a necessary need myself to develop the habit of a runner, so that I can complete this marathon that lies ahead of me. And that motivation, that why, is so important to keep that going. And sometimes you need the accountability to keep that going as well. Firstly, to kind of understand your own motivation, like, why am I even trying to do this? What's important for me about achieving this 42.2 kilometer run, or whatever it is, whatever that goal is? And I think what happens often is people get into just getting on and doing it, right? So it's so easy to get into, right, this is my goal, and this is what I'm going to do, and you try and get on and do it. But there's the kind of the hierarchy, isn't there, of that being, which is what you're referring to. That being goal is, how do I want to be on this journey to achieving my goals? So I really love that you've mentioned that, and I think you go into this in quite a lot of detail through the app as well, don't you, in terms of that motivation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've brought up a great point, right? Which is that there are going to be moments where you just struggle, right? And I think we have to kind of be honest about that, right? It's normal. We all struggle with stuff, and I think that so then it's about, okay, how do you plan for that, right? And it's kind of simple, but it really is. If you sit down and you think a little bit more thoroughly, and you plan for things, then you're gonna have more resources, more tools at your disposal, for those tougher moments, right? Where you can tap into those, and they will push you on more, right? Like if you're running a marathon for charity, well, you're definitely going to make sure, right, that you finish because you want to do it for the charity. Or if you go and tell a bunch of your friends and family, I am running the marathon, or you publicly declare you're running the marathon, right? You want to make sure, that's an awful lot of motivation to make sure you actually get there and do it, right? And that's just human nature. And I think that's a big part of it for us, is we really focused on what is human nature, right? How are we as beings? Let's dive into it, but let's accept it, and then let's build from there, because that's how we're going to get to the best outcomes.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Oh, you've made me do it here, haven't you, Andrew? You've made me declare it right here. So I'm gonna have to make this habit. And I love that, in terms of that, what you'd mentioned about that breakdown. Start with the small and build. I mean, I'm just looking at myself, and right now it's like, am I going to get to 42.2 kilometers? Like, it feels like it's unachievable. And that's the same with every habit, whether it's a weight loss goal or a get fitter goal, or whatever those goals are in terms of your movement and exercise. It can sometimes feel out of reach. But what you do so effectively through the app is that 1% increment, that kind of building on it and layering on it, which is so helpful. And also what you raised about the obstacles, because we know with habits there are going to be roadblocks. Their obstacles are going to be there. It might be raining, or you're going away on holiday, or whatever it is, something that gets in the way of what is your kind of routine and what you were expecting to do. So absolutely preparing for the roadblocks. And as you say, you've got to open your eyes to those, because we know they're coming. But then rather than being being excuses, is plan in advance how you circumvent those, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then when you accomplish it, then it feels even better, right? Because you actually push through, and then you have that much more confidence, and you feel better, which is also an important piece.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So great. Look, I would absolutely recommend anyone listening to take a look at the Slope Health app, because it really has got all of those elements that Andrew's talked about, which are so essential for building those habits, the increments, the accountability, the creating the goals, the motivation. You don't have one of those, and you're much less likely to keep the maintenance around it. So Andrew, can you now give us 3 key things, 3 key actions that listeners today can take?
And now, here is your lifestyle first prescription. Your 3 activating actions to take you from knowing to doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think the first thing is do something, right? Get out there and do something every single day. I think it's incredibly important to do that. The next thing I think is don't put too much stress on yourself to, buy things or to make any big changes initially, right? I think it's very much just about get out there and do what makes sense, right? If you don't own workout clothes, put on some old clothes, right? Or you don't even have to necessarily get out there and sweat, right? So I think that's also another really important one. And I think the last thing I would say is just give yourself the chance to embrace, just let go of any ego, right? And just really think about what you can do. Why you want that. Take those moments and reflect, and just think about, okay, where am I? Why do I want to do this? And let yourself have that internal dialogue and conversation, because you're going to be actually really impressed by what you come up with, right? It might not seem like it might not feel a little natural, but it's going to lead to some great stuff. So I think if you can do those things, or any one of them really on any given day, I think that you're going to be quite successful in your endeavor.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's really resonated with me. Firstly, that every day that you talked about is just so crucial to creating a habit. Secondly, I can't believe you told me I can't buy anything. Like, I want to get new running shoes, and I want to go and buy that running gear.
If it motivates you, you should. If it motivates you, you should. But I don't want to put any pressure on
you. Yeah, absolutely. But that last bit about the ego, I think that's so important, and we could probably talk about that all in a separate show. But I'm going to do this after we stop talking and just take a pause and really know why is this important, right? Why is the movement goal, the exercise goal, the activity goal, for me, the marathon, for other listeners, maybe other things, but why is that important? And then to hold that as I carry on the journey. So I really appreciate that. That's been so helpful. So tell us how people can reach you. I know there'll be lots of people listening who will be really wanting what you're offering. So tell us, how do we find Slope Health? How do people connect with you as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find Slope. So our website is slopehealth.co. And you can find us on both the Google Play Store for Android and on the Apple App Store for Apple. So you can download the app. You can find us obviously on all the social media platforms as well. And you can find me as well if you want to get in touch. I'm happy to help however I can.
Okay, great. I will put all of those links onto the show notes as well. I have the Slope Health app, so I'm going to get super engaged in it as well, because I have to. I have a strong need and a strong desire now. So, thank you so much, Andrew. That's been a really, really helpful conversation. You've left us with some key things to think about and take action on, because I'm all about taking action. So thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you as well. It's been wonderful.
You're very, very welcome. Which now leaves me to wish everyone listening a happy, healthy day.
Thanks for joining us on the Lifestyle First podcast, making self-care as easy as 1, 2, 3. Don't forget to subscribe and share. and we'd love it if you'd be kind enough to leave a review. To learn more or to arrange a consultation, please visit www.dralkapatel.com. See you next time.